I am now going to welcome on stage Steve Leventhal. He's the CEO of CorStone. Please make a round of applause for Steve. Hi, Steve. How are you?
Jane.
You're doing good?
Yes, I'm doing great. Hi, everybody. Great to be here.
So you're the CEO of CorStone.
Yes.
My first question is therefore super simple. What is CorStone, and when was it created?
CorStone is an international NGO that I founded about 15 years ago in 2008 with the purpose to focus on inner well-being, inner health and well-being, particularly around girls, adolescent girls, and youth in low-income countries.
Can you give us some maybe data, as you said you were in different countries? Which countries? What do you do?
Sure. So maybe I'll start with the sort of the purpose behind the founding a little bit. About 25 years ago, I was looking out at the landscape of a lot of really tremendous work that was being done with youth in low-income countries around the world by a lot of really wonderful international nonprofits and so on. But I noticed this big glaring gap, and Eric just talked about it a little bit. Really two gaps. One of those gaps being that there's an emphasis on working on the tangible, on the practical, on the visible. School infrastructure, teacher training, building a clinic, building a hospital, building a road. These are very, very important and critical aspects, of course, of creating a functioning, well-functioning society. But I found very little work being done on what I would call the internal pieces. Self-identity, self-concept, attitudes, values, and so on. And the truth is, the uncomfortable truth is we still have about 1 billion youth living in poverty in low-income countries around the world. That's about 12% of the world's population. And for me, and I think most people would agree, that's a huge untapped potential. So when I founded CorStone, it was really to look at the inner piece of that in a very evidence-based way. We started with just 100 girls in an 800-year-old Sufi enclave in Old Delhi in India. As of 2025, we'll be 5 million kids that are going through programs that we've developed across India, Kenya, and Rwanda.
Is there more countries you're trying to address to
Yeah, we have demand now from several other countries, and unfortunately, it's just a matter of putting the funds together, to launch those. But we're looking at Uganda, Cambodia, Vietnam, Senegal, and the United States.
So from what I understand, you're trying to have a systemic approach, not just a local approach. How do you do that? Very concretely, what kind of programs, and do you do positive lobbying, working with governments and everything?
Yeah, great question. So we do both community-based programs as well as school-based programs, but our focus has really been on large-scale change, systems change. So how do you impact in a positive way, as I was saying, the self-identity, attitudes, values, and so on, of a child, but millions of children, in some way where they become empowered to push back against, for example, in many areas where we work, early marriage, massive gender inequities, and so on. So while we have worked in both community-based programs as well as schools, we have found if we really want to have a systemic change, you need to have a partner on the other side who can take over your program and continue it when you as an NGO depart and when the funding departs. So in India, we've worked across around 6 states, but our largest program is when one of the poorest and largest states in India, it's a state called Bihar, B-I-H-A-R, Bihar, in northeast of India near the Nepalese border. There's about 120 million people in that one state. So very, 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 very large. So for the last 10 years, we've been working very closely with the government. We have several, actually, multi-year agreements in place with the government, where we're expanding now. We started there in maybe a few hundred schools. We're now expanding to 35,000 schools across the state. The program is being put into the state curriculum. So that's about 3.5 million children who are 99% of whom live in poverty, who will be going through the program. In Kenya, we have an agreement with the National Ministry of Education, which is putting a program in every school nationwide across the country. And the program is basically a 1 hour a week program that we have an approach that we call working from the inside out, really starting with helping a child to reimagine really what's possible, reimagine their self-identity. There's a huge missing piece in development work. When you're a girl and you're poor and you're from a low caste or discriminated against tribal region, if you're not dealing with that potential and that potential shift of reimagining self-identity and what the trajectory of your life can be, then you're missing the boat. And we've done many randomized, a couple of randomized control trials, year after year evaluation, and we know this is the missing piece.
So there's the evaluation, but how did you build this program firsthand? What questions did you ask yourself? Did you go see psychologists? How did you build it?
So my own background is an intersection of Eastern thought and psychology, and a master's with a focus on organizational psychology. But when I started with, as I mentioned, I started with just 100 girls in this enclave in Old Delhi. When I started, I didn't know if this had legs or not, And so I brought together a very small team of therapists and counselors and people with social work and so on, and we built what I would call a skeleton kind of program. And I trained just 4 teachers in this school how to do the program. And within 3 months, they came back with the most well-attended day of school is when they can come for the group, for the program. Relationships between teachers and students changed, and students changed, and relationships between the teachers changed, school engagement went up, and so on. So we started very small. From there, I moved to about 1,000 girls across several slum areas of India. For that, I brought in a formal someone to do a formal evaluation. And again, the results were off the charts. So at that point, I went to a funder who gave me the best advice that I'd ever probably received working in this sector. I basically went in, I'm not going to mention the funder, but it's a large international funder who works on reproductive sexual health and adolescent health, maternal health around the world. And I went in basically with 2 requests. I said, I want to do a program for 50,000 girls, and I want you to fund it. And I said, I want to do a large-scale randomized control trial because I believe that what we're going to find is that when we focus on inner well-being and inner health and inner development, we're going to see impacts not just on mental health, which we will measure, but also adolescent health, self-advocacy for your education rights, health rights, school engagement, so on and so forth, reproductive sexual health. So we predicted that we would see impacts across these multiple domains. So that program officer from the foundation said the best thing ever. He said, we'll fund your randomized control trial because I see what you're trying to do and I really believe it's going to work. No problem. And to do this kind of research is very expensive. And then he said to me, I really don't care about your 50,000 girls. We have 400 million. So I want you to go home and I want you to think about that level of scale. And that was transformational for me for a small nonprofit, but also in terms of the vision of what was possible.
How do you scale up so much and still keep the DNA of the project?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The DNA is a really important piece. So we are very research-based, and after we conducted the research trial, the results were excellent. And so dissemination and publishing and all of that was a hugely important piece. The second piece was then to engage with the government who knew we were doing the trial, and to find sort of, friendly faces on the other side. Now, as probably everybody can imagine, when you work with government, you have a lot of instability, especially governments in the areas where we work. You have a lot of turnover. You certainly have corruption, which fortunately we have not had to deal with. So it's important to really pick your allies at sort of the high level, but also to work as grassroots as possible. And I think this is going to become, should have already become, but will become a very important piece of climate change work. There's a lot of interest right now in this intersection of inner well-being, girls' education in particular, and climate change. Because girls in so many ways hold the future of the world.
Can you explain in which ways? Because we always, lots of NGOs address girls first, but it's not always clear for people in their mind why it's so important to address girls first. Can you explain us quickly why?
Well, one piece, of course, is if you're leaving out roughly 50% of the world and you're trying to make, global transformation, you're not going to reach global transformation.
Yeah.
Second piece, of course, is in many of the households in which we work, I'm not saying this is universal, but in the areas where we work, the women, the girls who then become women, have a lot of control over decisions that are going to be made around household purchases and so on. Equally important, they are the decision makers around, are they going to marry off their girl, their daughter, at 12 to 13 years old into sort of another generation of poverty? Or are they then themselves going to become change makers and push their children to complete their education and so on? So it becomes very important to look at what is that education going to be. I personally feel that most education, public school education, mass education, government-funded education, not so much private schools, but government education focuses very much on what do you want to be in your life, not who do you want to be. This is a huge missing piece. And our work is really about who do you want to be in a world that, like it or not, is going through massive, massive transformation. If we don't raise that level of consciousness about that, both at a spiritual level, psychological level, emotional level, so on, then I think all this other wonderful work that you see here is great, but it will not succeed.
So from what I understood, there's it's 1 hour a week. How do you transform those girls and boys, because there are also boys in some programs, in just 1 hour a week? So when you start, how are they, and what shifts, what inner transformation do they go through during the program, and what do they go out with?
So there's a long answer to that, so I'll try to encapsulate it.
We have time.
So I think I mentioned we work with what we call an inside-out approach. So starting with self-identity, self-concept, right? What do I think is possible? What are my strengths? And then from there, and we work a lot, some of you may be familiar with the field of positive psychology, which has a very well-researched body of work called character strengths. So we help children to identify those strengths, and all of you have them, even if you don't know they're called character strengths, otherwise you wouldn't be in this room.
So you address self-esteem,
yes,
I guess.
Well, so strengths are like, I'm curious, I'm funny, I'm very loving, I'm compassionate, I have a good sense of humor, whatever. So they identify that, and then they start to learn about how to use those strengths in different ways. Then we go into emotional competence, emotional intelligence. We move into like interaction, assertive communication, nonviolent communication. And then we get very practical with it about what is a goal, and how do I set a goal, and what are strategies to reach those goals. And then we tie that with issues around gender and other issues that are upfront for children, like, for example, early marriage or sexual harassment on the way to school, or I'm not able to go to school when I have my period when I'm a girl because that would be embarrassing or humiliating or something like that. So that's sort of the very fundamentals of the program. And our research has shown really interesting things. We can even you can even measure like emotional vocabulary. And in the beginning, the children's, particularly girls, but boys also, the emotional vocabulary is very, very small, very narrow. And by the end of the program, it's really expanded. You'll also see that manifest like the children's attitudes in schools, like they're much more engaged in schools. Teachers report that now the girls used to be very shy. Now they're more outgoing. A government official will go to the school and then report back to us and say, wow, before we used to go and we'd say, anybody have any questions? And the girls would sit there like this. And now they're in their face, pounding away. Why don't we have this? Why don't we have that? Blah, 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 blah. So they become very empowered around their rights and their ability to communicate what they want.
You also work with boys, and I'm sure they are shifted as well. Do you see transformation? How do they transform?
Yeah,
What
so
changed?
The boys piece is interesting. Maybe it's common sense, but I kind of missed it up front. Initially, we worked with girls only. And then you get to a point where you realize we can teach the girls how to push back. We can teach the girls how to advocate for their rights, to be strong and empowered, and so many other things. And at the end of the day, if we don't teach boys not to rape and to abuse, which is a massive, massive problem in the communities where we work, then at the end of the day, you're still going to have somewhat limited results. So it has been, as wonderful as it has been to visit some of the all-girls schools that we go to and to see who they have become, it's really equally wonderful to meet the boys. And we have recorded them, saying initially I thought, oh, these silly girls, why are they going to school? All they're going to do is make chapatis at home and, so on. Like, just no sense around their sort of individual right to live a, fulfilling life. And then we see this huge transformation in terms of the boys, in terms of how they look at that. And even boys who say, and they don't mean this in the way, oh, a girl needs a protector. It's not that. But they say, now I see that part of my job is to ensure that the girls in my community also have an opportunity, to live.
So it brings them together, I guess.
Yes, yeah, very much. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We talked already about scaling up. What advice would you maybe give the audience about how do you bring institutional change? How do you bring systemic change? Is there an approach that you would recommend? Some steps?
So I do think okay, first of all this gray hair, I earned this, right? So it doesn't come easy. And I don't want to pretend in any way it's just, a nice straightforward path to success. But we certainly have learned and documented over the years, there's people who do a top-down approach and people who do a bottom-up approach and multiple different leadership styles. And honestly, from my perspective, you need all of the above. You need to have developed those champions, as I was saying earlier, at the top level, because they're going to advocate for you and push you through, some of the political challenges that you're going to face. But those faces change. And so we work very closely at the community level. It's what's called the block level in India, or the district level or county level in Kenya, at multiple levels, having a as high-touch approach as possible. And also recognizing, I come out of marketing business development originally many years ago in the private sector, just recognizing that particularly in these areas where we work, your brand is everything. And our staff has been so well trained that even the slightest word that comes out of your mouth, or you show up at a school out in the jungle, but you show up 10 minutes late versus you show up on time. Like all these things, all these little things really add up. And it takes years, to build the brand equity. And of course, to bring your funders along for the ride. We have taken an approach that we don't have lots of funders, but we have a very strong core group of corporate and private funders who've been with us for years. And I think that no matter what industry you're in or sector you're in, that's really important. Yeah.
If you could start all over again and go back 15 years before when you started CorStone, what would you do differently?
Not a lot.
Or what did you wish you knew that would have made you gain time?
I think, like I said, this program officer who put me in touch with the scale, 400 million in India alone, maybe right out off the bat if I'd noticed that, but that was only maybe a couple of years in. I think it usually comes down to funding. I've worked in startups in Silicon Valley prior to this before, moving into the NGO world 25 years ago. Funding is always a challenge no matter what you're in, yeah? And as my uncle, who was a very successful businessman, says, if you don't need any money, the banks will loan you money. And when you need money, the banks won't loan you money, right? Investors are kind of that way, and philanthropists are kind of that way. So one of the things I think we did very well was from the beginning say, we're going to be evidence-based every step of the way.
Okay.
And some funders don't care about that so much. They want the pretty picture and the story, and a lot of that's important too. But we publish and we continue to publish, and I think that is a lot of work, and it's kind of expensive, but it really pays off. Yeah.
2 last questions before we finish. What are you grateful for? What does your work brings you human-wise?
I don't know how many hundred schools I have been to for visits, and there isn't a school that I have visited over the last 15 years that I don't leave and weep to see how this has happened. And it's not because of my team. Because of me, it's because of our team. We have about 50, 60 people in India or so, and the other team in Kenya, another team in Rwanda. And to see the work that all of them do every day, I'm just so grateful.
What touches you so much?
My own personal work, at a very soul level and psychological level, is really about unleashing potential. And to see that you really don't need to do very much. For me, the symbolism is really about kind of like everybody has a candle on top of their head, and some are lit and some are not. For these millions of children,
it doesn't take much to lead them.
Doesn't take much to just light, and then it's up to them to do the work.
And it's the same for everyone.
It's the same for everybody. It doesn't matter who you are. And the last piece that I'm really grateful for is my wife and partner, Kate, who's here, who leads all our research and programs. And today is our 10th wedding anniversary. So
yay!
She flew in this morning.
Happy anniversary.
So we'll be celebrating it in Paris. But the opportunity to work with your spouse, and we met through the work, the opportunity to work with your partner every day in such a close, level, and to be so aligned is beautiful, beautiful opportunity, gift.
My very last question, it's hard after what you just said, but my very last question is, what's next for CorStone?
Not more children. We've had enough. But I'm saying that because we are in lots of conversation right now, Kate and myself, as well as the rest of our team, about where we go from here. And I think probably like any business, you have if we're going to call it a business or a venture, you have to think, do you want to go more broad or do you want to go more deep? Our work in India and Kenya in particular is going quite broad, but we hope that over years it will get deeper and deeper so that we don't lose the fidelity and the quality of the work as it expands. The second piece of that certainly is moving to new countries. Like I said, we have 12% of the world's population living mostly without that candle lit, I guess.
There's a lot of work still.
And, that's what we do.
Thank you so much, Steve. Can we make a big round of applause for Steve Leventhal?
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.